You can't have a trickster. You have to have an angel or a demon. You can't have both.
Like there's some really hilarious ones. Like I've read some Native American ones, and one title to one was "Rabbit accidentally sleeps with his wife." And to me, it's just
that
like...
was my wife. Didn't mean to do that.
Didn't mean to do that. And I just thought it was hilarious.
Welcome to 7Robots.
Fantastically Terrible Podcast. Today, we will release the Kraken.
We decided to unleash Miguel's stupendous skill for going off on tangents. This show is definitely an experiment, and we'll try to start in one place and then see if we can wrap it up at the end.
It's alive!
It's alive! We're going to make this a challenge for you as well. Mm-hmm. It's the first time we've had a challenge on the show.
Yeah, it is.
See how many tangents you can count and let us know in the comments.
Please do.
We would love to read it. Then come back next week and we'll reveal the true number and read your comments.
Susie here keeps me focused. But if left to my own devices, none of this would ever sound remotely.
Nothing would stick to a narrative.
Nothing. It'd be a complete stream of consciousness. So we're going to do that.
We'll start with a point.
I'm excited.
That people can relate to. Mm-hmm. And then off you go. Where shall we start from?
We should start from talking about comparative mythology.
Ooh.
Wow, that was actually focused.
I like it.
And it's we're talking about a Japanese story or folklore and a Celtic one.
All right, so we're going to look at both of those.
Completely two different
places. And then
places.
we'll see where the wind blows.
Yeah, where my mind takes me.
That's right. Okay, so the first one is Oisín and the Land of Eternal Youth from Celtic mythology.
Right.
And the second very, very similar story is Urashima Tarō from Japan.
Right.
And in the first, Oisín meets Niamh in the forest, and they fall instantly in love. Mm-hmm. She puts him on her white horse and takes him to Tir na Nog, the Celtic otherworld.
Sounds like a beer.
I'd try that. Maybe a nice stout, a black and tan.
Beer.
So this was, as I mentioned in the title, the land of eternal youth where time stood still. Mm-hmm. They were married. They lived happily. Oisín's every need was met. They had beautiful colors that there were no names for. Everything he wanted, he got.
It sounds like an acid trip.
Maybe it was.
They were having some of the hoo-hash.
He possessed great strength here, almost invincibility.
That sounds like an acid trip.
That's true, little cocaína. And at the end of each day, his wounds would be magically healed as he slept in Niamh's arms. I'm trying hard with my pronunciation here.
Yeah, it's probably like a lot of silent letters.
After 3 years of being in this land of bliss, this land of eternal youth, he yearned to return to his home. But before he left, Niamh gave him her white horse and warned him that he should not descend nor allow his feet to touch the earth.
Right.
When he returned to his home, he saw the place where his father's castle once stood, but now it lay in ruins. He didn't understand. He called out to all of his friends, but nobody answered. He finally found some peasants working in the fields, and they were having trouble moving a large boulder from the road. So Oisín got off his horse, completely forgetting the warning from Niamh, in order to help them with the boulder. Mm-hmm. Still having some invincible strength, he lifted it, moved it, no problem. The peasants were in awe, and then suddenly he started to turn old. The years quickly took their toll.
Sounds like Monday morning.
Times infinity.
Times infinity, yeah.
And he became an old man, and the peasants shrieked. Oisín called for his father, Finn and the Fina, but the people only distantly knew these names from 300 years before their time.
Sort of Rip Van Winkle.
Yeah, it's true.
But I don't want to go on the tangent just yet.
Yeah, we'll save the Rip Van Winkle tangent for later.
Right.
Right now, we'll switch to the Japanese tale of Urashima Tarō.
Here we have a fisherman named Urashima Tarō. He comes across some boys who, delighted in being cruel to a poor tortoise, they're poking and pulling and beating on it. Urashima Tarō rescues the tortoise, and he quickly took it back to the sea and went home.
So there's a lot of different versions of this story. This is just one of them.
But far away. I mean, like, totally on the other side of the earth. It's Japan. Mm-hmm. Keep this in mind.
Yes, Japan is far from Ireland. Thank you
Yes.
for pointing that out.
I'll get to that tangent
Okay.
after this.
Yo.
The next day, he went out on his boat, and after a while, he heard a voice call him. The tortoise wanted to repay Taro's kindness. She took him on her back to Rin Jin. No, this isn't a drink. It's the Palace of the Dragon King.
I sense a theme here with all of these names you associate with a drink.
Yes,
All
drinking.
right.
It's the Palace of the Dragon King of the Sea. There he meets the Emperor and the lovely Sea Princess. So there's something about underwater meeting very good-looking women.
Interesting.
On both.
Do go on.
Tarō stays there with her for a few days, but soon wants to go back to his village and misses his aging mother, so he asks permission to leave. The princess is sorry to see him go, but wishes him well and gives him a mysterious box, which she tells him never to open.
I don't want to go on a tangent, but that reminds me of a little Greek mythology we'll maybe touch on later. Go
Except
on.
it's reversed.
Yes.
With the help of the same tortoise that he rescued, he is soon at the seashore. When he returned, he didn't recognize anyone.
Did he sell seashells by
Maybe some calamari. I don't know. In the spot. So he didn't recognize anyone in the spot where his he did see in the spot.
He was back in his town.
Yeah.
Everything seemed weird. He didn't recognize anyone.
I must focus.
He went to where his home was.
Right.
But it was different.
Right. He introduced himself to a man and explained that he was looking for his mother. The man looked confused and thought Tarō was joking. He said a man called Urashima Tarō once lived in this village, but that was 300 years ago. Note.
I know they both said 300 years.
years.
I don't know if that was just the internet, but I thought that was odd.
Struck by grief.
It depends on the version of the story.
Okay.
Some say he absent-mindedly opened the box. Others say he felt very despondent and he was in despair and he didn't know what else to do. So regardless of his motivation...
suicide by opening box?
No. His last hope.
Okay, his last hope.
Like Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Obi-Wan.
Yes. So he opens the box and what happens?
A cloud of white smoke bursts out and Tarō is instantly ages and drops dead on the beach.
Nice. A little dramatic. So his youth escaped from the years that had passed were trapped in the box. When he opened the box, they escaped.
Right. So this tale shares almost every core element of Urashima Tarō and Oisín,
and Oisín.
That sounds like a drink. Oisín spray.
I'm not sure which story is older. Maybe if you know, you can let us know in any of the comments.
I think
where you're watching this. What do you think?
So I think at some point we were either transmitting these different stories. So there must have been a shared story that these two come from.
Could be. Absolutely.
And I kind of see it that way.
They're very, very similar.
Eerily similar.
Unlike in other heroes' tales, in Celtic mythology, a visit to the other world ends in a point of no return, just like it did with Oisín. Neve is said to be waiting for her doomed lover and he never returns. So there isn't, it's almost a sad ending instead of a heroic victory over the underworld or the overworld.
It can also be seen too as you can never go back once you have left, whether it's your time period.
Absolutely. But that's unusual in the hero myth where they come back changed and better.
Probably it's older.
Yeah, it could be. And the Japanese as well, because again, it lands
like if you look at Loki, Loki is the oldest god of the Norse.
How do you know it's the oldest?
They talked about, I've read plenty on and they say that he's the older one, which makes sense because if it ties back to more tribal sort of like spirits, he is the crow, and he metamorphosizes, or the rabbit, but he metamorphosizes, which ties back to more of the tribal cultures and tribal religions and the altered mind experiences.
Yeah, the older the culture, it seems to me, they understand that there's the duality.
Right, and then the duality plays off of each other.
Right. To me, in more modern mythology, more modern stories, including all the way up until movies and television shows now, the hero...
He's one-dimensional.
One-dimensional.
Whereas when you had the trickster hero, and I would throw in James T. Kirk as a trickster hero in many ways.
Yeah, I suppose.
Because he's not necessarily... He's dishonest sometimes, but you know why he's dishonest. Bugs Bunny is a trickster hero.
Yes, he is.
And he's awesome.
We love Bugs, but he is a pain in the butt.
Especially... Yeah, but he comes from the Native American and African tradition. Really, it's Brer Rabbit. And Brer Rabbit...
Or Reynard the Fox in the French mythology.
Or the Reynard the Fox, but really it's married with Native American. It comes from the Uncle Remus stories.
Now we really define the roles.
Right. Joseph Campbell, a lot of his stuff might be a bit outdated, but there are some things that still hold
Hero with
true.
1,000 Faces helped inspire Star Wars.
It did, but I find that his masks of God are far more interesting because he goes into the trickster. He said the trickster became devils and clowns, but the trickster tells you the ugly truth that nobody wants to talk about.
Yeah, you can't have a trickster. You have to have an angel or a demon. You can't have both.
Like there's some really hilarious ones. Like I've read some Native American ones, and one title to one was Rabbit Accidentally Sleeps with His Wife. And to me, it's just
that was my wife. I didn't mean to do that.
Didn't mean to do that. And I just thought it was hilarious. Understanding that certain nature that sometimes people just do things out of mischief, not necessarily out of being bad. What we consider primitive actually has a much more complex.
Yes.
And we have actually simplified everything.
We really did.
We really did.
It's black and white. And if we go back to, as you were saying, Rip Van Winkle, he walks away with his dog and he discovers these dwarves, these
something like
strange beings who have like barrels of beer.
Which is interesting because Cherokee, out of all the Native Americans, believe in little people.
Okay. There's a little tangent for you.
They believe in dwarfs.
They got barrels of beer. He's more than happy to help them because he doesn't work.
Right.
And he goes with them and follows them and they're partying and he parties with them. He drinks too much and he falls asleep.
Right.
And when he fell asleep, America was still a British colony under King George III.
The turd.
The turd. King George the Turd.
Turd.
So when he woke up, everything was different. He went to look for his family.
That's a pretty good Irish accent.
Thank you. It's not going to last long. I can only do accents for a very short period of time.
That's great.
So he went to look for his family, and everything was different. Very similar to the stories that we were reading.
Wee people.
No, they weren't wee people anymore. And he found a couple and chatted with them and found out that it was indeed his daughter or his son. I don't remember which.
Right.
And he had been asleep for 20 years.
20 years.
And during this time, they were no longer under the king. They were now
A republic.
A republic. They had reached their freedom and everything had changed. And everyone loved Rip. And his stories of falling asleep, having a great party, drinking lots of beer, and then woke up 20 years later. So unlike the other tales where they died, it was really awful, right? They lost their youth and they died. In the American version, he was a celebrity and everyone wanted to hear his stories. And that's the end of my Irish accent.
That's pretty good.
I'm sure an Irish person would think it was terrible, but it was fine for our little podcast.
Yes, it was fine.
So, as we mentioned in Rip Van Winkle, which for some reason I can't say very well today,
Those crazy
it was
Dutch
almost
names.
a happy ending. And the guy who never worked
I want to say
went
Rip
to sleep
Van
for 20 years. His family
Bullwinkle.
was raised without. His family was raised without him. The wife was left alone.
The wife.
The wife was left alone. Stop making fun of my mistakes. I'd kindly appreciate you refraining from making fun of my mistakes.
Okay.
And then he's a celebrity and his kids take care of him. So he goes back to doing nothing. Very different ending than the Irish and the Japanese story. I had mentioned during the intro about the box, and it reminded me of Pandora's box from Greek mythology.
Pandora.
Her story is actually really sad.
They're always messing over women in Greece. Actually, it's to the point that as a guy, I'm like, please, let one of these women win once.
So they give Pandora a box and literally say,
Don't open it.
don't open it. And when they created Pandora, do you remember the creation story of Pandora?
Not off the top of my head, no.
When they created Pandora, it was supposedly the first woman.
That sounds very similar to Eve.
And she was. And she was created by the gods. And it was Zeus trying to get back at Prometheus for creating man. So Zeus wanted to give Prometheus his comeuppance by creating a woman. And when they created her, the different gods gave her different quote-unquote gifts. Well, none of them were supposed to be intellect or understanding, right? They wanted her to be a scourge on mankind.
Can I say something?
Yes, of course you can.
Something that our kids would say?
What?
That's sexist.
Yes, they do say that, and I find it hilarious. So they gave her different qualities, one of which was extreme curiosity. Now, why would they give her curiosity?
Well, wait a second, though. Wait a second. Without extreme curiosity, none of what we do would ever get done.
I agree with you. It wasn't
Okay, but I'll let you
necessarily a
continue.
bad quality. I just mean this becomes difficult when someone is given a box and says, don't open this box.
See, this is why
And
tricksters are great.
That's
because
right.
tricksters,
That's
you
right.
know that they're going to be
Their motivation,
A-holes.
exactly.
The
But
motivation is like
Zeus was
entertainment.
an a-hole and a
Oh,
jerk.
through and through.
And no one could tell me otherwise. Every story I read about Zeus is he's the ultimate fargin arsehole. The ultimate fargin arsehole.
Oh my God, I haven't heard that in a long time.
There you go, from Canada.
Straight from Canada.
Yeah.
From Shawinigan.
So she actually held out. Pandora held out for a very long time without opening this box. Credit to her, because no one else could have actually held out for this long. When she finally opened the box, of course, she unleashed every bad thing that we have, every plague, every problem that we have.
This just means that the
unfortunately.
gods really just wanted that crap out there.
That's right, and they blamed it on
That's
a
my
woman.
conspiracy
Just like
theory.
Eve. It's the same idea with Eve. That it was Eve that brought sin into the
Who
world.
would do that?
The only thing the Greeks, though, is at the bottom of the box, at the very end, they unleashed hope as well. So that was, even they softened it. But unfortunately, with Jewish, Muslim, Christian
so which
mythology...
god stuck that in there? He was like, nah, we can't be that rotten.
well,
We'll
it
just put this in there
We'll
to
give
make
you
her
hope.
feel a little better.
Well, with all these horrible things, hope was also unleashed to help us deal with the situation. However you want to interpret that. But like as I mentioned it, they blame it on Eve, and with no silver lining. Just it's her fault. All sin is her fault.
That's a real downer.
Yeah.
You know what, though?
What?
Then we shouldn't need a new Adam. We should need a new Eve.
Ooh, I like that idea. Good point. Why do we need a new Adam?
We don't need a new Adam. We need
Yeah.
a new Eve.
Yeah, good point. So she should be the redemptive character.
That's right. A woman should be the redemptive character.
Interesting. God does work in mysterious ways.
He does. It's great. And then you have Norse mythology. That's kind of like the heavy metal version of Greek mythology.
I love that description.
It's like Odin is like
as
Zeus.
soon as you said that, I thought of Tarna in the heavy metal movie.
Odin is like Zeus, but like, hey, I'm going to go over to this tree and I really want to get some knowledge. So I'm going to hang myself in this tree first to gain knowledge. And then I'm going to lose my eye to this tree.
You know what? That's a good point. Zeus didn't suffer.
No, he didn't.
And he used people to gain power.
He was a knob.
He used the Titans like Prometheus. He used like the
shameless.
monsters, the 100-handers, all those. And then he threw them in Tartarus afterwards. So he used people. Whereas in Norse mythology...
Yeah. Odin
suffered to get his wisdom.
Yes, he did. I mean, he had his issues. But he didn't really have the hots for a lot of women. Like,
oh, Zeus was just a horny dog.
He was. But,
Yeah.
you know, like, I mean, Odin's got like a much cooler story. He's got an 8-legged horse.
Goat, I believe.
No, it was a horse.
Okay.
The goat was Thor. Like, you have Thor running around with this, like, chariot of goats.
Who had... was it a goat that they could kill and
it was Thor.
Oh, that was Thor.
And unlike the comic book, he had to have a magic gloves and belt to be able to pick up this hammer.
That's right.
It wasn't because of some King Arthur crap. You feel bad for Loki because the gods are jerks. They get them to build this. They get the giants, the frost giants, and all these other giants to build them.
So maybe that is similar. Odin and the Norse gods are crappy to the giants.
To the
like
giants.
The Greeks are crappy to the giants.
If you take it as a political cartoon, like Robert Graves, the writer of I, Claudius, he also wrote mythology books. He said that if you took mythology as being political cartoons, that you could see it from a different perspective.
Interesting.
Now, you know, when the church gets in, this is another tangent of mine. When the church gets in,
Honey, there have been so many already. You don't have to.
oh, don't worry, I'm gonna tangent this up.
All right, little spaz.
So, you know, he's talking about Celtic mythology.
Who was?
We were
Oh,
earlier. When the church gets in,
yes.
they start to do all sorts of stuff that's really kind of wacky. So if there's a god or a goddess that they can't like stamp out, they just amalgamate it and turn them into a saint and all. Like, for example, the Archangel Michael, how is he a saint? He's a freaking angel.
I never understood how angels could be saints.
It's wacky
Because
to
a
me.
saint is supposed to be someone who endured suffering.
I don't know. But
know.
in Ireland, a lot of the gods became fairies. So, for example, if I remember correctly, and I probably don't, the god Lo, which was their version of Poseidon, ended up becoming Leprechaun. Like, talk about demeaning.
And then becomes a crappy horror movie.
Worse yet, Serial. Me Lucky Charms.
Me Lucky Charms.
This is terrible.
Terrible.
Like, talk about, like, getting culturally kicked in the sack. I mean, who does that? I mean, I'd rather just not be forgotten.
Right.
Or be a devil at least.
Right.
But a friggin' like
Well, I
leprechaun?
suppose that's a tactic.
It's this party.
I'm not sure how we got into this tangent.
It's an awesome tangent.
That
though.
I'm waiting to see how you get us out of it.
Now, one of the things that is very interesting is that were they independently thought of, like these different mythologies, or was there actual communication between these two peoples? Whether it's Japan and Ireland, I tend to kind of lean more into thinking that there probably was.
Well, yeah, I mean, this all is interesting debates. Did these
Yeah.
stories happen independently, or is there an original source that's so old that we don't know what it is? Even Atlantis, right? Plato mentioned Atlantis by referring to his ancestor, Solon. And in 360 BC, Plato wrote about how Solon visited ancient Egypt, and the ancient Egyptian priests described to him Atlantis, and how it was destroyed, they say, around
10,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Just like right now, they're discovering that the Aborigines said that they're like the oldest people on Earth. Their DNA is 50,000 years old.
I love that.
And they ignored them.
What we're taught is based on Western version of world history.
Yeah.
That's from a Christian point of view, and from a point of view that anything east, south, west is bad.
Right.
Everything that they taught was with an interpretation that if it didn't fit into their model, their timeline, they discounted it, or they just didn't continue to study it at all.
Yeah. And now that some people are actually studying some of that stuff.
What's amazing now with archaeologists, anthropologists, and they're seeing how old things actually are, not what an interpretation is.
Right. Even
they're
scientists
looking at
are studying
the evidence, not the mold that they wanted to fit into.
Even scientists now are studying old fables, Native American fables, and indigenous fables, because they're finding that actually their stories are pretty accurate.
They like diminishing the role of oral tradition and making it seem like if it's not written down, you can't
be accurate.
It's not accurate if it's not written down.
Right.
But the opposite is often true.
Right.
Because written accounts are influenced by who's in power, by propaganda. It changes over time. It's not consistent. Depending on the king, they will rewrite what was there before. Very kind of 1984, rewriting history. Everything from Jewish oral traditions of the Torah. You can look at Indian accounts of the sutras. Indigenous North Americans, you can look at anything, and they find that they're more accurate and consistent through history.
Yeah, because they apply the telephone game to it. In Native American culture, when the person is told the story, and you're trained to retell the story,
that's the part
you're
that
trained
they
to
erase.
Like literally. You have to repeat it word by word.
It's not I'm telling a stranger and a stranger's telling someone else. It's people who are trained and who must memorize them.
Word
and the Indian sutras, they are the same as accounts that they find 2,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago. It's getting older and older. Japanese cultures, Korean cultures, Chinese cultures, they're finding that they're so old.
Well, to get back to the Celtic thing.
Go on.
In the old Celtic traditions, the kings feared the poets. Why? Because they knew if they made up a poem or a song, it wasn't because people were sitting there reading it, but they knew that these songs and poems that they would make, if it was against the king, it would reflect throughout the land. They'd be like, oh yeah, that poet, he wrote about King Mark. He's a jerk.
And again, it's very Western-centric to assume that oral is less than written because they say written is better.
Right. And it's not usually seen as
traditions,
an addition. Like one thing is, it's an either or, which is very Western.
Yes.
So in many ways, what we've talked about, all these ancient stories, Atlantis and all this other stuff, really brings us right back to the original stories that we were talking about. If those people were to come to our time period, they wouldn't recognize any of the stuff that they
Ooh, I like
saw.
your tongue. That was awesome.
Yeah.
That was awesome.
So in many ways, whether it's the box of like that they carry, Urashima Tarō, or touching the ground, that they would turn to dust because they wouldn't really be able to relate to us today. And that's the sad aspect of it.
Wow, that was so good. High five for you. I loved it.
Eiffel Tower. Got to throw in a reference of IT Crowd.
One of our favorite shows of all time, IT Crowd.
Yeah.
I thought you were doing a brilliant wrap-up, and then you went off on another tangent.
This is what happens when I'm unfocused. And you have experienced, hopefully,
a day in the life of Miguel Guerra.
Yeah, Guerra and Susie Diaz.
Fighting the tangents.
Fighting the tangents. This is us unfiltered.
We hope you enjoyed yourself.
Yes. The fantastically terrible character or creature is Roman Moronie from the 1984 movie Johnny Dangerously.
Hilarious movie.
Very funny. Richard Dimitri played this hard-working, murdering mafia stereotype before they deported his butt back to Sweden? In the words of Johnny, played by Michael Keaton, the years hadn't softened Moronie. He continued to murder the English language and anyone who got in his way. Let's play a clip of Roman Moronie addressing the court.
That Roman Troy Moronie is the man responsible for the Mother's Day massacre, the Christmas Day slaughter, the Lincoln's birthday mutilation, and the Groundhog's Day beheadings.
Before we begin the questions, my client would like to read from a prepared statement.
Go ahead.
I would like to direct this to the distinguished members of the panel. You lousy corksuckers, you have violated my Fargan rights. This Samanambachi country was founded so that the liberties of common patriotic citizens like me could not be taken away by a bunch of Fargan iceholes like yourselves. Thank you very much.
That's it for today. 7Robots, Fantastically Terrible. Podcast is by Miguel Guerra and Susie Diaz. Our theme song is by Susie.
Thanks to all of our followers and subscribers. We appreciate it more than you know. To really help support our podcast, you can leave a review on iTunes. This helps others to find us, and we can see your name and personally thank you live on the show. For more information on this episode, including links to everything we've referenced, please visit our website at www.7robots.com/podcast.
Remember to check out Ghost Metal, our free Webtoon comic. Watch each week as we serve you sci-fi and horror stories on a macabre menu of detestable delights. Then we'll reach into the dark parts of our collective unconscious for dessert. A new episode is up every Friday for your abhorrent amusement. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.